What kind of person would tear down a sanctuary for the sake of a view? The wind howled through the pines of coastal Maine, carrying the sharp scent of salt and the distant cries of gulls. In the small town of Heron's Cove, where the cliffs met the Atlantic, a modest wooden structure stood perched on the edge of a bluff. The Heron's Cove Bird Observatory was no architectural marvel, just a weathered tower with a small platform, a few benches, and a logbook where volunteers scribbled notes about sightings of rare migratory birds. To the tight-knit community of researchers and birdwatchers, it was sacred, a fragile foothold in their mission to protect endangered species. To Karen Whitmore, it was an eyesore blocking her million-dollar oceanfront vista. On a crisp October morning as fog curled over the cliffs, Karen stood on her sprawling deck, coffee mug in hand, staring at the observatory with a scowl. She'd moved to Heron's Cove 6 months ago, fleeing the noise of Boston for what she thought would be serene luxury. But the tower, with its constant stream of binocular-toting nerds, ruined her fantasy. She'd had enough. Today she decided it would come down. The town was small, fewer than 1,000 souls, and everyone knew Karen. She'd arrived with her sleek SUV, her designer sunglasses, and an air of entitlement that grated on locals like sand in a shoe. She'd bought the old Miller estate, a sprawling property that bordered the public land where the observatory stood. The structure had been there for decades, built by volunteers and funded by grants to track the migration of the Atlantic puffin, a bird teetering on the edge of extinction. Karen didn't care about puffins. She cared about her view, her property value, and her peace. She'd already filed complaints with the town council, claiming the observatory was a public nuisance and an illegal encroachment. When that failed, she'd taken matters into her own hands, hiring a contractor to assess the tower's permits. She found a loophole. The observatory's lease on the public land had expired 3 months ago, unnoticed in the chaos of budget cuts. Karen saw her chance. She didn't act alone. Karen had a knack for rallying allies, or at least people who owed her favors. She'd charmed Tom Grayson, a local real estate developer with a seat on the town council, with promises of future business deals. Tom, a man with more ambition than principles, agreed to back her at the next meeting. Karen also roped in her neighbor Ellen Pratt, a retired schoolteacher desperate for Karen's approval. Ellen didn't understand the science behind the observatory, but nodded along when Karen ranted about those bird people cluttering the bluff. The plan was simple. Karen would present a petition to demolish the observatory, claiming it was unsafe and outdated. Tom would sway the council, and Ellen would gather signatures from unsuspecting neighbors. By the time the researchers caught wind of it, the vote would be done. Dr. Lila Harper, the lead ornithologist at the observatory, was oblivious to the brewing storm. She was 38, wiry and intense, with dark hair always pulled into a messy bun and eyes that lit up when she spotted a puffin's telltale orange beak. Lila had spent a decade studying the birds, mapping their shrinking habitats, and fighting for their survival. The observatory was her life's work, a beacon of hope in a world that seemed to care less each year. She lived in a small cabin a mile from the cliffs, surrounded by field guides and data logs. Her team, 3 graduate students and a handful of volunteers, worked tirelessly, often sleeping in tents to monitor dawn migrations. They just secured a grant to expand their research, a rare win in a field starved for funding. Lila had no idea that Karen Whitmore was about to unravel it all. That morning, as Karen plotted, Lila stood on the observatory platform, binoculars pressed to her face. The fog was lifting, revealing a sky streaked with pink. A puffin swooped low, its wings cutting through the mist. Lila's heart raced. She hadn't seen one this close in weeks. She scribbled in the logbook, unaware that across the bluff, Karen was on the phone with her contractor, finalizing plans to have the tower inspected for structural flaws. The contractor, a gruff man named Hank, didn't ask questions. Karen paid well, and that was enough. By noon, Hank's truck was parked near the observatory, his crew poking at the tower's beams with crowbars, claiming to check for rot. Lila noticed the commotion and jogged over, her boots crunching on gravel. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp but unsteady. Hank shrugged, pointing to Karen, who stood nearby with a smug smile. "Ask her," he said. Lila's stomach dropped. She'd heard rumors about Karen's complaints but hadn't taken them seriously. Now, facing the woman's icy stare, she felt the first pang of dread. Karen didn't mince words. "This thing's coming down," she said, gesturing at the tower. "It's an eyesore, and it's on borrowed time." Lila's face flushed. She tried to explain the observatory's purpose, the puffins, the research, the years of data, but Karen cut her off. "I don't care about your birds," she snapped. "I bought this land for the view, not a science project." Lila's hands clenched. She wanted to scream, but she knew it wouldn't help. Instead, she turned to Hank. "You can't touch this without council approval," she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Hank glanced at Karen, who nodded. "We'll see about that," Karen said, turning on her heel. As she walked away, Lila noticed a small crowd gathering, locals drawn by the noise, whispering among themselves. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. By evening, word of Karen's plan had spread. The town's only diner buzzed with gossip. Some sided with Karen, tired of the observatory's ragtag crew trampling their lawns. Others, especially the older folks who'd watched puffins as kids, were outraged. Lila sat in her cabin, poring over legal documents, trying to find a way to save the tower. Her students, bleary-eyed from late-night data analysis, rallied around her. "We'll fight this," said Mia, a 24-year-old grad student with a fiery streak. "She can't just bulldoze science." Lila nodded, but her mind raced. The council meeting was in 3 days. They had to act fast. Outside, the wind howled, and in the distance, the observatory stood silhouetted against the fading light, fragile but defiant. The next morning, Lila woke to a text from Mia. "Check the town forum. It's bad." Her heart sank as she opened her laptop. The Heron's Cove online forum, usually a sleepy space for lost dog posts and bake sale announcements, was ablaze. Karen had posted a petition titled "Remove the Unsafe Bird Tower," complete with photos of the observatory looking shabbier than it was, angles carefully chosen to highlight peeling paint and weathered wood. The comments were a mix of support and outrage. "Finally, someone's doing something about that junk," wrote one user. "Leave the birds alone," countered another. Lila scrolled, her chest tightening, until she saw a post from Ellen Pratt, Karen's neighbor, claiming the tower was a hazard that could collapse in a storm. It was a lie, but a clever one. Fear worked better than facts in a small town. Lila's team sprang into action. Mia and the other students, Jake and Priya, plastered flyers around town, detailing the observatory's importance. They knocked on doors, explaining how the puffin data helped protect coastal ecosystems. Most locals listened politely, but some slammed doors, parroting Karen's line about property values. Lila focused on the legal angle, digging through town records to prove the observatory's lease could be renewed retroactively. She found a clause that required a public hearing before any demolition, a small victory that bought them time. But Karen was relentless. By mid-afternoon, Lila spotted her in the town square, handing out glossy pamphlets with Tom Grayson at her side. Tom's presence was a blow. His influence on the council was no secret. Lila watched from across the street, her stomach churning as Karen's charm drew nods from passers-by. The twist came that evening, unexpected and brutal. Lila was at the diner, nursing a coffee, when her phone buzzed with a photo from Jake. It showed a puffin lifeless, tangled in fishing net on the beach below the observatory. The image hit like a punch. Puffins were rare here, and every loss was a setback. Jake's text read, "Found 3 more like this. Nets aren't local." Lila's mind raced. The nets looked new, industrial, not the kind used by Heron's Cove fishermen. She suspected foul play but had no proof. The discovery lit a fire under her team. They posted the photos online, framing them as a call to action. "This is why we need the observatory." The town forum exploded again, with locals now sharing stories of puffins they'd seen as kids, memories Karen's petition couldn't erase. For the first time, Lila felt a spark of hope. Karen, however, was undeterred. She doubled down, hosting a community meeting at her estate, serving wine and hors d'oeuvres to sway the wealthy newcomers who'd bought up coastal properties. She painted the observatory as a relic, a barrier to progress. "We deserve beauty," she said, gesturing to the ocean view the tower obstructed. Ellen, eager to please, nodded along, though her eyes darted nervously when someone mentioned the dead puffins. Tom took the floor, promising modern solutions, like a digital monitoring system that wouldn't clutter the bluff. Lila crashed the meeting uninvited, her boots still muddy from the beach. She stood at the back, arms crossed as Karen spoke. When Tom mentioned replacing the observatory with cameras, Lila couldn't stay silent. Cameras can't track behavior, she said, her voice cutting through the room. You're trading science for a photo op. The room went quiet. Karen's smile tightened, but she waved Lila off. This isn't your meeting, dear, she said. Lila left, her face burning, but she'd planted a seed of doubt. Back at the observatory, the team worked late, sorting data and drafting a presentation for the council. The dead puffins haunted Lila. She couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was connected, though she had no evidence. Mia, ever the investigator, suggested checking local fishing records to trace the nets. It was a long shot, but Lila agreed. They spent hours cross-referencing suppliers, finding nothing concrete but enough to raise suspicions about a nearby developer with ties to Tom. The nets, they learned, matched ones used in offshore projects Tom had lobbied for. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to fuel their resolve. As midnight approached, Lila stood on the observatory platform, the ocean roaring below. The tower creaked in the wind, a reminder of its fragility. She thought of the puffins, their bright beaks fading from the world. We're not losing this, she whispered, her breath visible in the cold. The council meeting loomed, and tension gripped Heron's Cove. Karen's petition had gained traction, but so had Lila's campaign. Locals began showing up at the observatory, offering coffee or old photos of puffins to share online. A retired fisherman, Gus, told Lila he'd seen Karen arguing with Hank near the beach days before the dead puffins appeared. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lila's team leaned into the emotional angle, sharing stories of the observatory's history, how it had been built by hand, how it had inspired kids to study science. The town was splitting, and Karen's polished exterior was starting to crack. She snapped at a reporter who asked about the puffins, her composure slipping. Lila saw it as a sign. Karen wasn't invincible. But as the meeting drew closer, Lila knew the real fight was coming. The council meeting was held in the town hall, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs packed with locals. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Lila stood at the back, her notes clutched tightly, her team flanking her like soldiers. Karen sat near the front, poised and polished, her blonde hair gleaming under the lights. Tom Grayson lounged beside her, exuding confidence, while Ellen fidgeted, avoiding Lila's gaze. The room buzzed with whispers as the council president, a grizzled man named Harold, called the meeting to order. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a fitting soundtrack to the storm brewing inside. Lila's heart pounded as Harold announced the agenda, the fate of the Heron's Cove Bird Observatory. Karen spoke first, her voice smooth as silk. She stood, heels clicking on the linoleum, and presented her case with the precision of a lawyer. The observatory, she claimed, was a safety hazard, an outdated structure that blocked the town's potential as a luxury destination. She flashed a PowerPoint of her view, pristine ocean marred by the ugly tower, and cited property values, tourism dollars, and the expired lease. Tom backed her up, tossing out figures about economic growth that sounded impressive but vague. The council nodded, some clearly swayed. Lila's stomach twisted. Karen's argument was slick, appealing to greed and fear, while the truth, decades of research, a dying species, felt harder to sell. Then it was Lila's turn. She stepped to the podium, her boots leaving faint dirt marks on the floor. She didn't have Karen's polish or PowerPoint, just a stack of data logs and a trembling voice. She spoke of the puffins, their dwindling numbers, and the observatory's role in saving them. She showed photos of the dead birds tangled in nets, her voice cracking as she described finding them. This isn't just about birds, she said, locking eyes with the council. It's about who we are. Do we protect what's fragile? Or do we tear it down for a view? The room was silent, save for the wind outside. A few locals clapped, but Karen's supporters shifted uncomfortably. Harold asked for questions and Tom pounced, questioning the observatory's funding and suggesting cameras as a modern fix. Lila shot back, explaining why cameras couldn't replace human observation, but she could feel the room slipping. Then came the twist that turned the tide. Gus, the retired fisherman, stood up from the back, his weathered face set with resolve. He hadn't planned to speak, but the dead puffins had stirred something in him. "I saw Karen with that contractor Hank down by the beach," he said, his voice rough but clear. "Night before those birds showed up dead. They were arguing about nets, big ones like the ones in the photos." The room erupted. Karen's face went pale, her smile frozen. Tom tried to laugh it off, calling it hearsay, but the damage was done. Locals began murmuring, connecting dots. Ellen, caught off guard, stammered when a council member asked if she'd seen anything. Her silence spoke louder than words. Lila seized the moment, holding up a photo of the nets. "These aren't local," she said. "They're from offshore projects Tom's been pushing." Coincidence? The accusation hung in the air, unproven but damning. Karen recovered quickly, her voice sharp as she denied everything. "This is absurd," she snapped, accusing Lila of slander. But the mood had shifted. Locals who'd been swayed by Karen's charm now looked at her with suspicion. Harold called for order, promising to investigate the nets, but the meeting ended without a vote. The council needed time, he said, to review the lease and Gus's claims. Lila left the hall exhausted but hopeful, her team buzzing with adrenaline. Outside, the cliffs loomed under a moonless sky, and the observatory stood firm for now. Karen, meanwhile, stormed to her SUV, her heels clicking furiously. She wasn't done fighting, and Lila knew it. The next day, the town was a powder keg. The local paper ran a front-page story about the meeting, with Gus's accusation in bold. Social media amplified it, with hashtags like Save the Puffins trending among younger residents. Karen retaliated, posting a video on the town forum, tearfully claiming she was being vilified for wanting a better Heron's Cove. It was a performance and it worked on some but not enough. Lila's team kept the pressure on, organizing a rally at the observatory. Dozens showed up, holding signs and sharing stories of the puffins. A local artist painted a mural of a puffin on the tower's base, with the words "Protect Our Wings" in stark white. The image went viral, drawing attention from environmental groups beyond Heron's Cove. Lila felt a surge of pride but also fear. Karen's silence was ominous. She wasn't the type to back down. By evening, Lila got a call from Harold. The council had found the lease renewal clause, but Karen had filed a new motion, claiming the observatory violated zoning laws. It was a desperate move but a dangerous one. If the council bought it, the tower could be demolished within days. Lila's team scrambled, digging into zoning records, but time was running out. As they worked, Mia found a grainy photo online posted anonymously. Karen and Tom standing near the beach, with what looked like a pile of nets in the background. It wasn't proof, but it was close. Lila stared at the image, her resolve hardening. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. The rally at the observatory grew louder as dusk settled over Heron's Cove. Torches flickered along the cliff's edge, casting shadows on the faces of locals chanting for the puffins. Lila stood on a crate, her voice hoarse but steady, thanking the crowd for their support. The mural of the puffin gleamed under the torchlight, its orange beak a defiant splash of color against the weathered wood. Across the bluff, Karen watched from her deck, her silhouette rigid against the glow of her mansion's windows. She hadn't expected this. A town she dismissed as sleepy now roaring with purpose. Her phone buzzed with messages from Tom, urging her to fix this before the council's emergency meeting tomorrow. Karen's jaw tightened. She'd underestimated Lila, but she wasn't out of moves. Lila's team spent the night preparing. Mia and Jake combed through zoning laws, finding a precedent that protected scientific installations on public land. Priya, the quietest of the group, worked on a video compiling years of observatory data, charts of puffin migrations, clips of their awkward waddle, and audio of their low, mournful calls. The video was raw, emotional, and designed to hit the council where it mattered: their hearts. Lila barely slept, haunted by the photo of Karen and Tom near the nets. She'd sent it to a journalist friend at a regional paper, hoping they'd dig deeper. As dawn broke, the team gathered at the observatory, their faces pale but determined. The tower stood behind them, creaking softly, as if it knew its fate hung in the balance. Karen arrived at the council meeting with a new strategy. She'd hired a lawyer from Portland, a sharp-suited man named Victor who specialized in property disputes. He argued that the observatory violated obscure zoning codes, presenting a stack of documents that looked official but were light on substance. Karen followed with a tearful plea, framing herself as a victim of mob mentality. She gestured to the crowd outside, now spilling onto the town hall lawn, holding puffin signs, and claimed they were bullying her. "I just want peace," she said, her voice breaking artfully. Some council members softened, but Harold remained stone-faced. He'd seen the photo of the nets and had questions Karen couldn't dodge. Lila's presentation was the opposite of Karen's. Messy, heartfelt, and grounded in truth. She showed Priya's video, letting the puffins' calls fill the room. She spoke of the dead birds, the suspicious nets, and the observatory's role in preventing more losses. When Victor tried to interrupt, citing legal technicalities, Lila held up the photo of Karen and Tom. "This isn't about zoning," she said, her voice steady now. "It's about accountability." The room buzzed. Ellen, sitting near Karen, looked like she might bolt. Tom tried to deflect, calling the photo manipulated, but his voice lacked conviction. The council president called for a recess, and the crowd outside erupted in cheers, sensing a shift. During the break, Lila overheard Ellen whispering to another local, her voice shaky. "I didn't know about the nets," she said. "Karen told me it was just about the view." Lila's pulse quickened. Ellen was cracking, and with her Karen's alliance. When the meeting resumed, Harold announced they'd investigate the nets before voting. Karen's face was a mask of fury, but she held her tongue. Victor whispered something to her, and she nodded curtly. Lila knew they were planning something, but for now the observatory was safe. The crowd outside chanted louder, their voices carrying over the cliffs. Lila stepped onto the town hall steps, her team beside her, and raised a fist. The cheers swelled, but she felt no triumph, only the weight of what was coming. That night, the observatory was vandalized. Lila arrived at dawn to find the mural defaced, black paint smeared across the puffin's face. The logbook was gone and several beams were splintered, as if struck with a sledgehammer. Her team was devastated, but Lila's anger burned hotter than her grief. She called the police, who took photos but seemed skeptical. "Kids probably," the officer said, shrugging. Lila didn't buy it. She suspected Hank, Karen's contractor, but had no proof. The team cleaned up as best they could, repainting the mural and reinforcing the beams. The vandalism only fueled the town's outrage. More locals joined the cause, bringing food and supplies to the observatory. A high school teacher organized a puffin art contest for kids, and the winning designs were plastered across town. Karen's facade was crumbling. The journalist Lila had contacted published a story linking the nets to a company Tom had invested in, a bombshell that turned more locals against them. Ellen stopped answering Karen's calls, and even Tom seemed distant, his usual swagger dimmed. Karen, however, wasn't ready to lose. She filed a lawsuit against the town, claiming the observatory's supporters were harassing her. It was a desperate move and it backfired. The lawsuit drew national attention, with environmental groups rallying behind Lila. Donations poured in, enough to fund the observatory for another year. But Lila knew the real battle wasn't in courtrooms or headlines. It was in the hearts of Heron's Cove. As the council prepared to vote, she braced for the worst. The council's final vote was set for a chilly November evening, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Heron's Cove was a town divided, its streets lined with signs for and against the observatory. Lila's team had worked non-stop, rallying support, but Karen's lawsuit had cast a shadow. The town hall was packed, standing room only, with reporters from Portland and even Boston squeezed in the back. Lila stood near the front, her notes worn from handling, her eyes scanning the crowd. Karen sat across the aisle, her lawyer at her side, her face a mask of calm that didn't reach her eyes. Tom was absent, a sign of his waning influence. Ellen was there, but she avoided everyone's gaze, her hands twisting in her lap. The tension was palpable, a current running through every whispered conversation. Harold opened the meeting with a weary sigh, outlining the stakes: the observatory's lease, the zoning dispute, and the allegations about the nets. Lila went first, her voice stronger now, fueled by weeks of fighting. She spoke of the puffins, the data, the community that had built the observatory brick by brick. She showed new photos, puffins soaring over the cliffs, their wings catching the dawn light, and shared stories from locals who joined the cause. A teenager from the art contest spoke, her voice trembling as she described how the observatory inspired her to study biology. The room was quiet, moved by the raw hope in her words. Lila ended with a plea. This isn't just about birds. It's about what we leave behind. Applause rippled through the crowd, but Karen's supporters stayed silent. Karen's lawyer, Victor, took the floor, his argument cold and technical. He cited zoning codes, property rights, and the lawsuit, framing the observatory as a liability. Karen followed, her voice softer now, playing the victim. "I've been attacked," she said, dabbing her eyes. "All I wanted was to protect our town's future." It was a performance, but a weak one. The crowd shifted, unconvinced. Harold called for public comments, and Gus stood again, his voice steady. "I know what I saw," he said, pointing at Karen. "Those nets didn't show up by accident." The room buzzed and Ellen finally broke. She stood, tears streaming, and admitted she'd overheard Karen and Tom discussing taking care of the puffin problem. "I didn't know it meant hurting them," she sobbed. The revelation was a gut punch. Karen's face went white, her lawyer whispering furiously. The council deliberated for an hour, the longest hour of Lila's life. Outside, the crowd chanted, their voices muffled by the walls. Lila sat with her team, their hands clasped, barely breathing. When Harold returned, his face was grim. "The lease is valid," he said. "The observatory stays." Cheers erupted, drowning out the rest of his words. Karen stood abruptly, storming out with Victor trailing her. The victory was sweet, but Lila knew it came at a cost. The town was fractured and Karen's lawsuit loomed. That night, the team celebrated at the observatory, toasting with cheap coffee under the stars. The tower stood tall, its mural glowing in the moonlight. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. The fallout came swiftly. The journalist's investigation deepened, uncovering emails between Tom and the net supplier, implicating him in illegal dumping. Tom resigned from the council, his reputation in tatters. Karen's lawsuit collapsed when Ellen agreed to testify, her guilt outweighing her loyalty. Karen sold her estate and left Heron's Cove, her SUV vanishing down the coastal highway. The observatory, battered but standing, became a symbol of resilience. Lila's team secured a new grant, and volunteers poured in, inspired by the fight. The puffins returned that spring, their numbers small but steady, a quiet victory against the odds. Lila stood on the observatory platform one morning, watching a puffin dive into the waves. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the town felt alive again. She thought of the battle, the lies, the vandalism, the late nights, and felt a weight lift. The observatory wasn't just a tower. It was a promise, a reminder that small things could endure. She opened the logbook, its pages worn but full, and wrote, "Puffin sighted. We're still here." The words felt like a vow, not just to the birds but to everyone who'd fought beside her. The cliffs stretched before her, endless and wild, and for the first time in months Lila smiled. Months later, Heron's Cove began to heal. The observatory, once a point of division, became a gathering place. Families brought kids to watch puffins through borrowed binoculars, and volunteers repainted the tower, adding new murals of seabirds and waves. Lila's team grew, with Mia, Jake, and Priya taking on bigger roles, mentoring new students. The national attention brought funding, enough to install solar panels and a small lab for genetic studies. The puffins' numbers stabilized, a fragile win that felt like a miracle. Lila often stood on the platform at dawn, her breath visible in the cold, watching the birds swoop low. Each sighting was a reminder of what they'd saved. Not just a species but a way of seeing the world. Karen's departure left a void, but not the kind she'd hoped for. Locals spoke of her in hushed tones, a cautionary tale of ego run amok. Ellen, seeking redemption, volunteered at the observatory, her hands shaking as she logged sightings. She'd lost friends but found purpose, a quiet atonement. Tom faced legal trouble, his offshore deals under scrutiny. The town council, chastened by the scandal, passed new protections for public land, ensuring the observatory's future. Lila didn't gloat, she was too tired for that. Instead, she focused on the work, tagging puffins, analyzing data, teaching kids to love the wild. The broader impact rippled beyond Heron's Cove. Environmental groups cited the observatory's fight in campaigns across the coast, proof that small communities could stand up to greed. Lila was invited to speak at a conference in Boston, her first time away from the cliffs in years. She stood before a crowd of scientists and activists, her voice steady as she told the story, not just of the puffins, but of the people who'd rallied to save them. "It's not about one tower," she said. "It's about choosing what matters." The applause was deafening, but Lila's mind was back on the cliffs, with the wind and the waves. Back home, the observatory became a beacon. Tourists came, not for luxury views but to see the puffins and hear the story. The diner added a puffin pancake to the menu, a silly gesture that made Lila laugh. The town's kids, inspired by the art contest, started a junior birdwatching club, their chatter filling the bluff on weekends. Lila watched them, her heart full. She'd always thought science was her calling, but now she saw it was more connection, community, a shared fight for something bigger. The observatory wasn't perfect. It still creaked in the wind, and the budget was always tight. But it stood, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila found a letter tucked into the logbook. It was from Gus, the fisherman, written in his rough scrawl. "You did good, kid," it read. "The birds are lucky to have you." Lila's eyes stung. She thought of the dead puffins, the vandalized mural, the nights she doubted they'd win. Gus had been there, a quiet anchor in the chaos. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket. The stars were coming out, and a puffin's call echoed over the waves. Lila leaned against the tower, its wood warm from the day's sun, and felt at peace. The fight had changed her. She was still the wiry scientist with a messy bun, but now she carried a quiet strength, forged in the crucible of the past months. The observatory wasn't just her work. It was her home, a testament to what people could do when they stood together. She thought of Karen fleetingly and felt no anger, only pity. Karen had wanted a view but missed the beauty that mattered. Lila looked out at the ocean, its surface glinting under the stars, and knew she'd chosen right. As spring returned to Heron's Cove, the cliffs came alive with the chatter of seabirds. The observatory stood prouder now, its fresh paint gleaming, its platform crowded with volunteers and curious kids. Lila's team had grown into a small army, their data feeding global studies on climate and migration. The puffins, resilient as ever, dotted the waves, their bright beaks a flash of defiance against the gray sea. Lila spent her days training new researchers, her nights writing grants, her mornings watching the dawn. The fight for the observatory had left scars, on the town, on her, but they were the kind that made you stronger. The town itself was different now. The diner buzzed with talk of conservation, not property values. The junior birdwatching club grew, their handmade signs dotting the bluff. "Save our seabirds." Gus became a regular at the observatory, teaching kids how to spot a puffin's dive. Ellen, still quiet, found solace in the routine of logging data, her guilt easing with each entry. The council, wary of another scandal, prioritized community projects, funding a small visitor center near the tower. It wasn't fancy, but it told the story of the fight, with photos of the puffins and the people who'd saved them. Tourists left donations and locals left notes, a patchwork of gratitude. Lila's Boston speech had sparked something bigger. Universities reached out, offering partnerships. A documentary crew visited, filming the observatory and the cliffs, their cameras lingering on the mural that had survived vandalism. Lila shied away from the spotlight, but Mia thrived in it, her fiery passion perfect for interviews. Jake and Priya stayed behind the scenes, crunching data and dreaming up new studies. The team's bond, forged in crisis, was unbreakable. They laughed more now, their late-night coffee sessions filled with stories of the battle, Gus's gruff courage, Ellen's tearful confession, the night they'd repainted the mural under torchlight. The broader world took notice. The Observatory's story inspired laws protecting coastal research sites, and Lila's data helped shape policies on offshore fishing. The nets that had killed the puffins were traced to a company now facing fines, a small justice that felt huge. Lila didn't dwell on it. She was too busy looking forward. The observatory's lab was up and running, its solar panels humming. They'd tagged a record number of puffins this season, each one a data point and a hope. Lila kept Gus's letter in the logbook, a reminder of why they'd fought. She didn't need fame or glory. She needed the birds, the cliffs, the people who cared. One morning as mist clung to the cliffs, Lila spotted a puffin nest. A rare sight, a sign of recovery. She called the team over, their faces lighting up as they watched the bird settle in. The moment was quiet, sacred, a contrast to the chaos of the past year. Lila thought of Karen, now a distant memory, and realized the woman's greatest mistake wasn't her greed. It was underestimating a town's heart. Heron's Cove had rallied, not just for the puffins but for itself, for the idea that some things were worth more than money. The observatory was proof. Battered, imperfect, but standing. As the sun broke through the mist, Lila wrote in the logbook, "Nest sighted. We're building something new." The words felt like a promise, not just to the puffins but to every kid who'd painted a sign, every volunteer who'd shown up, every local who'd chosen hope over division. The tower creaked behind her, a soft sound in the morning quiet. The ocean stretched endless and wild, and the puffins flew free. Lila smiled, her heart full, and turned back to her work. The fight had been worth it. The birds were still here, and so was she. End.